I've been feeling down, I've been feeling so low. I don't really know why, I can't figure out why I'm feeling so alone. Never really know why, all I think about is how bad it could go. When I really don't know, no. I get these thoughts inside my head. What if I don't have what it takes? What if things don't ever change? Don't leave room for you, but what if you're holding me up? What if your love is enough? What if the power in your name could do anything? And what if you're making me strong? What if you were here all along? What if I'm right where you want me?
I pulled a Pastor Rick right there. Don't tell him I said that, okay? So today, like I said, we are concluding our series we've been in. The series is called What If? And we've been asking this question, what if this could be the best season of our life? And no, I'm not talking about the Buffalo Bills season, because we know that's not going to be the best season of their life. We're talking about what if this could be the best season of our life. And the three areas we've been focusing on during this series have been freedom, fulfillment, and growth. Freedom, fulfillment, and growth. If you were here for week 1, Pastor Rick talked about fulfillment and how we can be fulfilled in our life. The week after that, we talked about freedom for ourselves spiritually, what that looks like. Last week, if you were here, Kevin Austin was here, a guest speaker from the Set Free movement, and he talked about ways that we can partner with churches, with the organization on ending human trafficking, ending modern-day human slavery. I don't know about you, but my eyes were just opened to how real and how close to home a lot of that is. So you'll be hearing more about that as we go along. But today I want to talk about this idea of growth and growing in our faith. See, I believe what's true is that healthy things grow. So if we're healthy in our faith, there will be some growth. If you look at trees, for example, trees, as they grow older, they tend to grow taller, they grow wider, but they also grow deeper as well. In fact, the older a tree gets, the harder it is to fall. Even though it's growing so tall, it's going wider, the foundation is stronger, and it's growing deeper. And I think the same thing is true with our lives. As we are a Christian for any number of years, there should be some signs of growth, both outwardly and inwardly, like deeper, like roots in our lives. So what we're going to do today, we're going to spend the majority of today in one passage of Scripture. So if you have your Bibles or your Bible app on your phone, we're going to be in 2 Peter chapter 1. And during this time, we're going to talk about this roadmap that Peter, who wrote the book, he lays out for us that I just think is so beautifully done to show us how we can grow in our faith. So to give you a little bit of background on the book of 2 Peter, 2 Peter was actually a letter that Peter wrote. Peter was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. As you know, Jesus had hundreds and hundreds of followers while he was walking on the earth. And then he had 12 disciples who followed him even closer. But within that group of 12, Jesus also had 3 that were his closest followers, Peter, James, and John. So as we read through this passage, this isn't just from one of Jesus' followers, it's from one of his closest friends, one of the people that walked closest to Jesus. And this was a letter that Peter wrote to some of his followers that were following him as he followed Jesus. The book was written while Peter was in prison. We know that he was martyred shortly after he was in prison. He was kind of awaiting his trial. So these are also some of the last words that Peter ever wrote. So as we read these are things that he wanted his followers to know and to cling on to. So we're going to pick up 2 Peter 1, verse 3. And it says this, it says, His divine power, God's divine power, has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. He's saying that everything, we already have everything we need in order to live a godly life. We have everything we need in order to grow in our faith. And I love how he says that, because It's a reminder that we don't need a Bible education to grow in our faith. We don't need to have read the Bible through word for word 3 times before we grow in our faith. We don't have to be a Christian for 20 years before we can grow in our faith. Our knowledge of God, our knowledge of Jesus is enough for us to be able to grow. And then Peter, he gives us 8 things for us to focus on. If we want to reach our full potential in Jesus, if we want to grow, he gives us 8 very practical things for us to focus on. Starting in verse 5, these are Peter's 8 areas to focus on. Verse 5, he says, "But also for this reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue. To virtue, knowledge. To knowledge, self-control." And we'll read the other half in just a moment. But the first fill-in on your message notes, keys and focus points, the first one is faith. See, the foundation of everything we are is our faith. This is always our starting point when it comes to our relationship with God. We believe that we receive salvation, we receive the ability to have a relationship with God by His grace, but through our faith. There's not a checklist that we have to do in order to have a relationship with God. It's by His grace and through our faith. So we're going to go through all 8 things today, but I just want you to know this is where salvation happens. This is where we cross over the line, where our eternal destination changes when we put our faith in Jesus. And some of us here today, this is the step that you need to take this season. Maybe for you, for the very first time, maybe you've kind of had a head knowledge about God and you believe there is a God. You look at creation or whatever it is, and you know that there is a God, but you've never let it move from your head to your heart. And for you, the step that you need to take is committing to God, committing your faith and your life to Him. Maybe for you, you've been thinking about it, but you've been waiting till you figure some things out first. You've been waiting till you can read the whole Bible through. You've been waiting till you can maybe figure out some of those skeletons in your closet first. Let me just tell you that the people in the Bible who had the greatest amount of influence, the people in the Bible who changed the world, some of them helped to write the Bible. They weren't people who had it all together. They weren't people who had it all figured out. They were people who were tax collectors. They were fishermen that they had very little religious training. It's not like they were Jewish scholars that Jesus chose. He chose the ordinary people. So it's not about having it all figured out. I personally made the decision when I was very young. I don't know how old I was, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I made the decision to commit my life to Jesus. But if I'm being honest with you, it's mainly because I was afraid of hell, like most kids are. Like your parents give you a choice, heaven or hell, which one you would choose? Like who do I got to believe in to go to heaven? Like that was kind of the basis for my decision. But when I became older and I began to learn what it meant to follow Jesus and learn who Jesus was, that came to a place where I had to make the decision for myself. I was 19 years old when I recommitted my life to Jesus, and I had faith up to that point, but 19 was kind of the time where I was making my faith my own. I wasn't just going to ride on my parents' coattails in their faith. It was going to be my own faith. So before we can grow in our faith, we have to first establish our faith. Does it exist at all? Are we a Christian just because our parents were, and that is the way we were raised, and we have a Bible in our house, so we are a Christian? Or is it core to who we are? Is our faith real? Is there action to back up what we say we believe? So that's the first thing we have to settle. But Peter continues, he says, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue. Go ahead and fill that in. The second fill in, virtue. Another word for virtue that is more commonly used today would probably be the word character. Add to your faith character. A TV show that I've really been enjoying lately. It's a Netflix original show, which I love those. I think they do such a great job. But it's a show called The World's Most Extraordinary Homes. And I love this show because they don't just kind of give you an inside look of like celebrities' homes. Like it's not a remake of Cribs. You remember that show a long time ago. you're not just looking at mansions. What this show highlights is some unbelievably beautiful homes that focus on architecture and design. There's an episode of homes that are all underground homes that sounds like horrible, but they're just unbelievable how they let the light in from above. There's episodes on houses that were built on the edges of cliffs or right on the edge of the ocean that should be impossible, but they make them work because of the amazing architecture. And what I found was interesting is that some of these homes, again, they should be impossible, but the amount of investment they make into the foundation of the home was extraordinary. They would spend months and months and months building below the surface of the earth before they started to build above the surface because they had to make the foundation strong. There were some that they would spend millions of dollars on the foundation before they even put in the master bedroom. They were foundation focused. And here's what I found to be true in my own life and observing the life of others. Every time I want to go to the next level in some area of life, whether it's relationships, whether it's my marriage, whether it's my finances, or my relationship with God, every time I want to go to the next level, I have to go to a deeper level with my character. See, the dangerous thing in our world today is there's such an emphasis placed on skills and abilities and gifting that sometimes our gifts and our abilities can take us to a place that our character can't sustain us. And we could find ourselves in a position or a level of influence that is upward, but we've never gone deep enough to sustain where we are in life. So if that's you today, I would just, I think there's some people in this room that we need to make this next season about building deeper in our life. This show has taught me that it's possible to have these amazing homes on the edge of a cliff, on the edge of the ocean, but you better be willing to make the investment in the foundation. Otherwise, it will fall. So how do we do that? How do we invest in the foundation of our lives, and how do we build our character and our virtue? For some of us, maybe it's something that you have to stop doing. Maybe there's something that you're doing that was okay in the last season of life, but if you want to grow in this season of life, it's something you got to give up. It's something you got to stop doing. Some of us, maybe it's something we got to start doing. Something in our life that we need to just build the discipline into our daily routine in order to grow in our faith. Some of us, maybe we have to confess something that's holding us down, that it's just like this weight that we're carrying unnecessarily, and we have to confess it in order to move on, to go deeper in our character. So he says to faith add virtue, and then he says this, to virtue add knowledge. Go ahead and fill that in. Third one, knowledge. See, it's always healthy and good to constantly be growing in our knowledge of Jesus Christ. It is always good to grow in our knowledge. And here's the good news. It has never been easier. In the history of the human race, it has never been easier to grow in our knowledge of Jesus. Did you know that the Christians, right after Jesus, they didn't have a copy of their Bible sitting on their coffee table? The Bible wasn't even compiled yet. It was a series of letters that were circulating from church to church in city and city. They would flock to someone who would be able to read them, because not all of them could even read, in order to hear the letters that we now call our New Testament, to hear the Gospels, the eyewitness accounts of these people who walked with Jesus and learned directly from Jesus. And then even after the Bible was compiled a few hundred years later, it was generations and generations before it was even possible to own your own copy of the Bible. There were Bibles that were chained to the pulpits in some churches because it was so rare, and they were so afraid that someone would steal the copy of the Bible, and people would flock to these churches to hear the Bible read. And even today, there are countries in the world where it is illegal to own a copy of the Bible. There are countries where they would do anything to own a copy of the Bible. And then, You look at my life, and I have 12 different versions of the Bible sitting on my bookshelf. I have every version that's ever been written right here on my phone in every language imaginable. And yet, sometimes I neglect this. Sometimes I neglect it because it is so easy. Do you ever find that sometimes when something is so easy and the commitment level is lower in order to do it, that we don't do it as often? For example, many of you know, if you know me, you know that I love to hunt. And when I hunt, I have 3 different options for where I can hunt. I can hunt in my backyard, which is the easiest option. I can get from my bed to my tree stand in 15 minutes. Option number 2, I can drive 30 minutes to this land that I have permission to hunt in, and it's like from bed to tree stand in like 50 minutes-ish, and I could hunt there. Or I can drive an hour and 45 minutes, take a 30-minute hike up a hill, and go to my tree stand in Jamestown, which is from bed to tree stand in 2.5 to 3 hours. When I hunt in my backyard, I get up there around sunrise, and I'm there till about 9:30 in the morning, and then I get down, go make a warm cup of coffee and warm up and go about my day. When I hunt 30 minutes away, I stay in my tree stand until about 11 a.m., and then I get down and I go and have some lunch. When I hunt in Jamestown, I am in my tree stand from sunrise to sunset. Why? Because of the investment that I made to get to that tree stand. Because I'm not going to get down after an hour and a half. When I put 3 hours into getting there, I'm a little more committed at that point. And I think for some of us, it is so easy to access the scriptures. It is so easy to find these scripture references that sometimes we neglect reading it on a regular basis. We neglect memorizing some scriptures to hold close to our hearts because we could just Google it anytime. And we neglect it. And by the way, there's also, there's always 2 sides to every spectrum. There's some of us, too, that we focus so much on this knowledge thing. We kind of think that this is what faith is all about. Just growing in our knowledge, growing in our knowledge, growing in our knowledge. We go to Bible study after Bible study after Bible study, and we don't do anything really about the knowledge that we're gaining because we're so focused on just educating ourselves. That's why we talk so much about next steps, and we put them right on your connection card and your notes, because we don't want you just to be an educated Christian. We want you to have some action behind what you say you believe in, because we believe that knowledge is good, but applied knowledge is better. So some of us, this needs to be the focus of this next season. Maybe making it a priority, or maybe not focusing all of our attention to this one spot and being a little bit more well-rounded. Imagine if we did that with our spouses. If we studied our spouses like crazy. We learned what makes them happy, what makes them sad. We learned their favorite flower, their favorite chocolate, but we never did anything with that knowledge. At some point, we have to buy them the flowers, right? At some point, we have to buy them the chocolate. We have to put some action behind our knowledge. So Peter says, he says, add to faith virtue, to virtue knowledge. And then he says, add to knowledge self-control. I think why Peter tells us to add self-control to knowledge is because knowledge without self-control is dangerous. Have you ever noticed that? Knowledge without self-control is dangerous. There's this leadership principle, and I don't know who originally said it, but the principle is this: the more we want to go up, the more we have to give up. The more we have to go up, the more we have to give up, meaning that as we grow in our leadership and our influence, there are sacrifices that have to be made. And the same is true with most areas of our life. If we want to grow in our marriage or our finances or our career or our relationship with God, we have to learn self-control and we have to learn discipline. One of the growth groups that we're going to do in 2019 is called Financial Peace University. And I've had the opportunity to lead this a few times, and my wife and I, we've gone through it ourselves as well. And Financial Peace University is taught by this guy named Dave Ramsey, who teaches biblical principles for handling money. And if you've ever listened to a show on the radio or read his books, you know he's very much against debt. And he's very, like, no credit cards, no loans, no nothing. The only thing he's okay with is a mortgage. But even that, there's some parameters around that. And he's very much into budgeting and saving and kind of building wealth for your future and for future generations. And one of the phrases that he kind of became famous for, and he applies this to money, but I think it can be applied to all areas of life. He says, live like no one else so that you can one day live like no one else. And what he means by that is that if you want to be able to get yourself to a position of financial freedom, there are some sacrifices you have to make in this season to get there. So live like no one else now, like make some sacrifices that most people aren't willing to make. Give some things up, start focusing on budgeting and saving and paying off debt so that one day you can experience the financial freedom that most people don't get to experience. So he says this about money, but I think it can be true about all areas of life. If we want to go up, we need to give up. If we want some more influence in our companies, in our careers, in our family, in our community, there's some sacrifices that we have to make. So I believe some of us, we need to take a step in discipline and self-control this season. Maybe it's something we're listening to or watching or eating or drinking. The Apostle Paul, when talking about how we're free from the Old Testament law, he's kind of telling people like, hey, we're not held under the burden of the Old Testament law. He says this phrase, he says, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Meaning we're not under that burden of the Old Testament law, but just because we're not under that burden doesn't mean we should just do whatever we would like, because not everything is beneficial. So is there something you're engaging in that's preventing you from growing in your faith? So we have faith, we have virtue, knowledge, self-control. Then he says this, the passage continues, to self-control add perseverance, to perseverance godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. So the next one, the fifth one, is perseverance. As we grow in our faith, every step we take towards God will get the devil's attention. More than anything, he wants to keep us from having faith in God. He wants to prevent us from experiencing a relationship with God. But if he can't succeed in that, he will try his best to prevent us from growing in our faith. He will try to stop us from growing because he knows if we grow in our faith, we grow in our influence. And if we grow in our influence, we can affect our communities. And the devil doesn't want that. He doesn't want us to affect our communities for the better, to show people the love of Christ in everything. He doesn't want that. So we need to learn perseverance. Perseverance is doing what is right, even if it means we lose something. It means developing patience. It means developing endurance. I remember when I was 19 years old, and again, I had rededicated my life to Jesus, and almost instantly I felt this desire to be in ministry. But for me, I knew my next step in faith was to begin to serve every single Sunday, to begin volunteering, and just like if I want to be in ministry one day, this is something I have to make a priority. But the problem was that I had this job at a bank, and it was one of those banks that are open 7 days a week because they're in a grocery store. And when I got hired, it was with the expectation that I would work 3 out of 4 Sundays every single month. So I knew for me, my next step was I have to be at church every Sunday. I was in a position where I couldn't, so I had a decision to make. So I remember going to my boss at the time, and I said, hey, this is what I would like to do. I even offered her a compromise. I said, I would work 1 Sunday a month, and I'll work every Saturday you ever need me to work if you can give me the other 3 Sundays off. And unfortunately, the answer was no. And I don't hold that against her at all. Again, I signed up for this. This was the expectations when I took this job. But for me, I had to be here every single Sunday. So I gave her my 30-day notice. I said, we can make this like a 365-day notice as long as I can have these Sundays off, as long as you need me, but it was 30 days. And I had no backup plan. I was living in an apartment at the time, and I didn't really know like how I would pay rents. I didn't have a lot of bills, but like I had a couple, and I didn't know how I was going to pay those. But I took the step of faith out of obedience because I knew this is what God was calling me to do. But it meant I had to go through some things. I had to go through some sleepless nights not knowing kind of what the next chapter was going to look like. I had to take a job that I hated. I was working back at a restaurant, and I did not like this job at all. I had to take that back just so I could be available on Sundays. It was uncharted territory for me. And can I tell you what? It was scary. It was stressful. It was hard at times, but it was worth it. God opened up so many doors in my life because of that decision, that small step of obedience. He taught me how to persevere. Like again, I was 19. There wasn't a lot of things riding on me having a steady paycheck, but it was still scary as a 19-year-old. I had to learn how to persevere. And don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying quit your job this week so you can be at church every single Sunday and start volunteering every single week. But if God's calling you to do that, if God's placing something on your heart, maybe something completely different, but you're afraid because there's some things you have to walk through, there's some things you have to endure or persevere, I'm just telling you, it is worth it. So Peter continues, he says to perseverance, add godliness. Godliness is simply looking more like Jesus. It's being aware that every circumstance we walk through is being used to shape us and to mold us to look more like Jesus. Some of us, we're in a valley of life right now. Like we have the mountaintops and we have the valleys. Some of us, we're in the valley. Like things aren't going good. Like things are hard. We're learning to persevere. And we're in this valley. And godliness is recognizing that God can and will use this season of life to shape us to be more like Jesus. Some of us, we're on the mountaintop right now. Like we've had a 10-year plan. We're in year 6 and we're right on track. Like the kids are getting along. Everyone's coming over for Thanksgiving. Things are going great. Like we're building our retirements. Like everything's going amazing. Godliness is recognizing that God can use those times in life too to shape us to be more like him. But let me elaborate on mountaintops for just a moment. Some of us get frustrated with God because we were told when we put our faith into him that life would be a series of mountaintops. That when we put our faith into Jesus, that we would experience mountaintop after mountaintop after mountaintop. Maybe we just came into the relationship with God with these expectations that life would just get better in the sense of like everything's going to go how I wanted it to go. Peter kind of dealt with this too. Peter, when it's called the Transfiguration, you can read it in the New Testament. Peter, James, and John, the 3 closest to Jesus, they go up on this literal mountaintop where God the Father comes down. Moses and Elijah, who were Old Testament prophets, they were dead for hundreds of years. They appear in the flesh. So it's Peter, James, and John, Jesus, God the Father, and Moses and Elijah, these Old Testament heroes. And Peter's like, what is happening? Like he's like, let's build tents. We have to stay here forever. Like he literally wanted to build tents and live on this mountaintop. And Jesus like rebukes Peter because I think Jesus knew there was work to be done in the valley. They had these followers that were waiting for them, not on the mountaintop, but on the valley. And Jesus knew there was work to be done. So if we're maybe in that season where we've been expecting mountaintops after mountaintops, let me just encourage you. I believe the valley is when we are shaped the most to be like Jesus. I pray that things go well for me financially. I hope that happens. I praise God when it does. But can I tell you what? When things are tight, that is when I learn to rely on God. That is when my faith gets stronger. I pray that my family can always have strong health and that there's always, health is always something we never have to worry about. But can I tell you what? When my wife was in the hospital 7 years ago for a week, that is when I learned how to pray. It's the valleys that God can use, I think, more than the mountaintops to shape us to be more like Jesus, which is godliness. So Peter continues. He says, to godliness, add brotherly kindness. Number 7, brotherly kindness. So what is brotherly kindness? Brotherly kindness is simply relationships. Relationships are central to who we are as people. Is it possible to grow in our faith without relationships? Yes, but we weren't meant to. Let me demonstrate it this way. Most of you know that I'm a big Bills and Sabres fan. This season, a little bit more Sabres than Bills because it's a little less depressing to watch those games. But I'm a big Bills and Sabres fan. And I try to watch every single game. I don't like watching the games alone, though, because this is what happens. I'm watching the game alone, and something happens that's good, like Josh Allen dives for a touchdown or Jack Eichel scores, and I get excited, but this is how I celebrate. Yes. Then I go back to my phone, and I'm just kind of half watching, half just doing my own thing, and they score again. Yes. But when I watch the game with a friend, Brian, would you come on up? When I watch a game with a friend, and there's someone sitting next to me, this is how I celebrate. I'm going to mute my microphone for a moment. One. What's more fun? Yes. Or that. And I think the same thing is true with our walk with God. Is it possible to grow to experience the love of God on our own? Yes, but we weren't meant to. We were meant to experience it with people. We were meant to grow alongside of people. We were meant to grow with people who are like-minded, who are on the same journey as us. This is, by the way, why we talk so much about growth groups. We believe that life is best done in circles, not rows. Rows is what we do on Sunday. Rows are good, but circles are better. If all you're doing is experiencing the row, it's a little incomplete. And like the circle doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be something that we set up as a growth group. It could be just friends that you know from church, that you meet together, you hang out together, you do life together as you push each other towards the goal of being more like God. I remember when I was 19 and I rededicated my life and I was like making all these changes in my life. One of the first things I did was I joined a small group in my college ministry that I was a part of. And there was like 15 guys that we would meet every single week. And we would do like Bible studies together and we would grow in our knowledge. But what I remember most was not, I don't know if I remember a single Bible study. What I remember is the relationships that were formed because of this group. 3 out of those 15 were groomsmen in my wedding. I'm still like very close to most of them. I still talk to them on a regular basis. And I credit so much of where I am in my faith to the relationships that I had, to the relationships that I have today with other people who are on the same journey as me. Have you ever noticed when I don't know if you walk for exercise or run or I ride my bike. I can ride my bike so far by myself, but I can ride farther and faster with someone else. Because it's not all on you. There's times where you just need to follow someone who's a couple steps ahead of you. There's times when you're going to lead the person who's a little bit behind you. We weren't meant to do this on our own. It's easier. It's better. It is more fun when we're surrounded with other people. That small group when I was in college, they were there for me to high-five me on my good days, and they were there for me to cry with me and to pray for me during my struggles. And I love those guys. I talk to them on a regular basis. I love them, and I'm so grateful for them. And in this season of life, I have a group of guys, and we have couples that we hang out with and we're friends with, that they spur us on to be more and more like Jesus. I don't know where I would be without that. So Peter, he continues, he says, to self-control, perseverance, to perseverance, godliness, to godliness, brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness, add love. The end goal of our spiritual growth comes down to love. As we're adding to our faith all of these things, the goal we're striving towards is love. Love is what completes this picture. Love is what I would say it holds this whole picture together. Any of these things without love is of little or no value. I mean, we could go down the list. Faith without love is incomplete. Virtue without love is religion, and Jesus didn't come to start a religion. He came to facilitate relationships between us and God. Knowledge without love is pretty much what the Pharisees and the religious leaders of Jesus' day focus on. I mean, nobody knew the Old Testament scriptures the way the religious leaders did. They would memorize some of those boring books of the Bible, like Leviticus, those ones that we read, but they're hard to get through. They would memorize them word for word. But they used their knowledge to puff themselves up and belittle everyone else. And it blinded them from who the Messiah was. They were studying who this Messiah would be, and then here he comes, and they don't even recognize him. They end up crucifying him. Self-control without love is legalism. Perseverance without love, I've seen lead to false humility. When love is missing from the equation of perseverance, it tends to have this woe is me feeling where I just need to get through this day. And it gains all this attention. Godliness without love is simply impossible. I mean, if God is love, then we can't be more and more like him without it. And brotherly kindness without love, I mean, that's just full of ulterior motives. It's using people for our own personal gain. And look at what Peter says at the end of this passage. It's not in your message notes, but it's up here. It says, for if these things are yours and abound, you will be neither barren nor unfruitful, meaning you will have purpose in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For he who lacks these things is short-sighted, even to blindness, and has forgotten that he was cleansed from his old sins. Therefore, brethren, be even more diligent to make your call and election sure, for if you do these things, you will never stumble. That's what we want. Like, no one wants to go through life with struggle after struggle, stumbling. We don't want to stumble over the finish line of life. We don't want to stumble over the finish line of faith. We want to be running through it. If you do these things, you will never stumble. So what is your next step today? We have 8 to choose from. 8 different things. What is your next step? And I would just encourage you, maybe pick your bottom 2. What's something you're struggling with? Is it knowledge? Has it been because it's so easy, you've just been kind of putting it off to the side? I'll get to that later. Is it self-control? What is their bottom 2? And let me just encourage you with this. This is where it starts, but this is where it's held together. It starts with our faith, but it's held together with love. So love should be in every single one of these. Don't wait till we have all of these figured out till we start here. This is where it's held all together, and this is where it starts. So maybe today your next step is faith. Like, before you even get to any of these things, you need to settle this idea of faith. And if that's you today, I just want to lead you in this prayer. So if you would, just go ahead and bow your head, close your eyes. If that's you today and you say, today I'm crossing over that line, I'm going to dedicate my life to Jesus, would you just pray something like this in your heart? You don't have to say it out loud. God can hear your heart. God, I'm so sorry that I've tried to be my own God, that I've tried to just live life on my own terms. God, I believe that you're real. I believe that you sent your son to die on the cross for me, to make a way for me to have a relationship with you. And God, today I step over that line of faith. I don't have it all figured out. I'll do my best. But God, today I ask that you would come into my heart. God, that you would make me new, and I will do my best to figure the rest out. If that's you today, with all of your heads bowed and eyes closed, if you prayed that maybe for the first time, maybe you're recommitting your life to Christ, if you pray that for the first time and you meant that with all your heart, would you just go ahead and raise your hand? I just want to pray for you as we end today. If that's you today, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? God, I thank you so much for the souls that are changed. God, in this building and in buildings all over the room, that lives are being changed for you. Destinies are being changed. God, I thank you so much for that. And for the rest of us, God, help us to grow in our faith this next season. Whatever that looks like, it's going to look different for every single one of us. But God, help us to know what we have to do to go deeper with you so our roots are deeper. God, we love you so much. In your precious son's name we pray.